The year is 1921, and the air in the Appalachian Mountains is thick with the scent of coal dust, wet earth, and the metallic tang of impending violence. Yes. Imagine standing on a ridgeline in Logan County, West Virginia, listening to the click of 10,000 bolt-action rifles being chambered at once. This is not a distant theater of war in Europe or a skirmish on a colonial frontier. This is American soil, and we are witnessing the largest armed insurrection in the United States since the Civil War. Before we dive into the tactical nightmare of the Battle of Blair Mountain, consider subscribing to the channel to ensure you never miss our deep dives into the most consequential military upsets in history. What you are about to hear is the story of a forgotten uprising where coal miners, a desire for basic human dignity, faced off against a private army, and eventually the United States military. It is a story of strategy, betrayal, and a brutal clash of classes that redefined the American labor landscape. To understand, the grim reality men found themselves entrenched on a mountain ridge during the early 20th century. These miners were not not soldiers by trade, but their environment had forged them into a hardened, cohesive force. For decades, the coal operators of West Virginia had exerted total control over their lives. They lived in company towns, paid their rent by company guards. The Baldwin Felts Detective Agency, essentially a private mercenary force employed by the coal companies, operated with impunity in entity, evicting families, intimidating anyone who dared to speak the word union. The tensions had been simmering for years, marked by the Matewan massacre, where a confrontation between the town's pro-union police chief, Sid Hatfield, and the Baldwin Felts agents left 10 men dead on the streets. When Hatfield was later assassinated on the steps of a courthouse by company agents, the miners' patience finally shattered. They did not just want better wages, they wanted to dismantle the apparatus of control that had turned their homes into open-air prisons. The situation had escalated into a full-scale mobilization. The miners, organized into a makeshift army, began to gather at Marmot. They wore red bandanas around their necks to signify their allegiance to the movement. Being used as a badge of honor rather than a slur, they were not a disorganized mob. They had scouts, their objective scouts, supply lines, and a rudimentary command structure. Their objective was to march south to Logan County to organize non-union miners into their ranks. They were essentially attempting to liberate an entire region from the grip of the coal operators. The state government, led by Governor Ephraim Morgan, was inextricably linked to the interests of the coal industry, and he labeled the miners an army of insurrectionists, but the initial response from of insurrectionists. He called for federal intervention, but the initial response from the administration was hesitant. The coal companies, however, did not wait for the government. They raised a private army of their own, led by Sheriff Don Chaffin, a man who functioned as the warlord of Logan County. Chaffin transformed the terrain into a fortress, utilizing machine gun nests, elevated defensive positions, and even aerial reconnaissance to track the miners' approach. The battle itself was a masterclass in asymmetrical warfare. The mine were up against an entrenched force of approximately 3,000 deputies, local police, and company-hired mercenaries. The terrain of Blair Mountain was unforgiving. It was a dense, rugged landscape of steep slopes and deep ravines, favoring those who held the high ground. As the miners began their ascent, the battle lines crystallized. The lesson was intense and surprisingly sophisticated. The miners utilized their knowledge of the terrain, moving in small, coordinated units to flank the machine gun nests that Chaffin had placed at critical bottlenecks. The sound of gunfire echoed through the valleys for days. It was a strange sight, American citizens using military-grade weaponry against their own kin, with the defense coordinated by a sheriff who acted more like a general in a war zone than a law-enforced fighting officer. The miners were not just fighting, they were fighting for the right to exist as free citizens. They faced heavy fire from the entrenched positions, often pinned down by the superior positioning of Chaffin's forces. As the conflict dragged on, could no longer remain a bystander. President Warren G. Harding was pressured to intervene, and he eventually authorized the deployment of federal troops was a critical turning point.
Can't keep this up,
The miners, who were largely willing to
Ain't
fight,
quitting.
sustain police,
We dig
and the
till
company
vein runs
mercenaries
dry.
were suddenly
Cut the
faced
rail
with
lines. We
the
have no
prospect
choice
of
but to
fighting the
surrender.
United States Army.
If we don't act
This was the
tonight, they'll
moment
seal
where the
North
moral
Shaft.
and strategic
He's right.
calculation
It's
shifted.
now or never.
The miners realized that a direct confrontation with federal aircraft and infantry was a losing battle that would result not only in their total destruction, but in a catastrophic blow to the labor movement as a whole. Many of the miners to surrender was agonizing. Many of the miners wanted to fight to the death, believing that their cause was worth the ultimate sacrifice. The leadership realized that further resistance would only justification for mass executions and harsher crackdowns. They made the calculated choice to lay down their arms and return to their homes, effectively ending the organized march, but sowing the seeds of the labor movement that would eventually transform the country. The aftermath of the Battle of Blair Mountain was a period of severe legal and social retribution. Nearly 1,000 miners were indicted for treason and murder. The trials were heavily biased, fear and state-sponsored hostility. The legal proceedings were used as a weapon to drain the resources of the unions and to break the spirit of the miners. Yet the outcome was not the total attention to the conditions in the West Virginia coalfields. Conditions in the West Virginia coalfields. The public, through newspapers and reports, began to understand the brutality of the company town system. It forced a conversation out in full in no society. It forced a conversation about the role of corporations in American society and the limits of state power. The miners had lost the battle that resonated far beyond the borders of Logan County. The government was forced to reckon with the fact that its citizens could not be suppressed indefinitely by private armies and state-sanctioned violence, integrated in state-sanctioned violence. In the years that followed, the lessons of Blair Mountain were intricate fabric of American labor law. The New Deal-era legislation, particularly the Wagner Act of 1935, eventually codified many of the rights for which the miners had been fighting. They wanted the right to organize, the right to collective bargaining, and the right to escape the tyranny of the company store. These were the issues that drove them up the mountain, and these were the issues that defined the labor movement in the mid-20th century. The conflict at Blair Mountain serves as a stark reminder of the cost of progress and the length to which individuals will go when they are pushed to the brink. A moment where the internal divisions of the nation threatened to tear it apart once again, but it was also a story of immense courage, nor were the heroes in the traditional sense. They were people caught in a systemic struggle who chose to stand their ground when every institutional force was aligned against them. Reflecting on the Battle of Blair Mountain, we must consider what it means to live in a civilized society. We often look back at historical battles and glorify the tactics or plot of the combatants. But we must never lose sight of the human cost. The miners who died on the failure were victims of a system that prioritized production over humanity. The peace we enjoy today is often built on the foundations laid by those who were willing to challenge the status quo. Peace is not merely the absence of conflict. It's the absence of justice. It is the presence of justice. When justice is denied to a large segment of the population, conflict becomes inevitable. The story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the necessity of maintaining a dialogue between those in power and those who are governed. We must honor the memory of those involved by striving to create a society where such extreme measures are never again deemed necessary. As we conclude this look at one of the most intense and forgotten chapters of the American experience, it is worth contemplating how history is shaped by the events in West Virginia were not isolated. They were part of a broader global shift in how labor and capital interacted. The miners of Blair Mountain may have been defeated in the field, but their influence on the development of American democracy is undeniable. Their sacrifice forced a change in the way the government interacted with its citizens, ensuring that the labor movement would become a permanent fixture in the political process. The struggle for human dignity is a continuous process, one that requires vigilance, empathy, and a commitment to understanding the complexities of the past. If you found this deep dive into the Battle of Blair Mountain thought-provoking, please consider liking this video and sharing it with someone who values the nuance of history. Your support allows us to continue digging into the stories that textbooks often gloss over, bringing the forgotten conflicts of our past into the light. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the struggle for rights and the enduring fight for a more equitable world. Remember that every battle, no matter how small or forgotten, contributes to the narrative of who we are today. Stay curious, stay analytical, and keep holding history to account.